Something that I brought up in my review for Alan Wake is the concept of supernormal stimulus. A supernormal stimulus is an exaggerated version of a stimulus to which there is an existing response tendency, or any stimulus that elicits a response more strongly than the stimulus for which it evolved. Essentially, a supernormal stimulus is designed to overload your senses to the point of exhaustion in order to keep you addicted and engaged in whatever product has said supernormal stimulus pumped into it for longer periods of time and to keep you wanting more when it's over. So why am I bringing this up? Well, it feels like we live in an era where most video games we play are rather over the top and bombastic and chock full of these supernormal stimuli. Because of this, and although these kinds of games are still fun, they can be exhausting and can frankly feel like work to play. So how does this fit in with this review? Well, to me it felt like Stellar Blade wasn't full of these over-the-top stimuli, and it felt like I was just playing a video game. Don't get me wrong. One could argue that Eve and her sex appeal, along with the many revealing outfits you can dress her up in, is a solid example of supernormal stimuli. However, it's not the kind that would leave me exhausted after playing the game. Anyway, as much as I love these over-the-top video games, they aren't the kind of games that I can just sit back and decompress to after a long day. So it's incredibly refreshing when a game comes along that just feels like I'm playing a video game that's fun and I can just kick back and enjoy during my downtime, rather than this thing that's, although being a lot of fun, can still feel exhausting to play. A couple of things to get out of the way before we continue. Because I believe that Stellar Blade is more than its censorship controversy, I'm choosing not to comment on said controversy besides telling you that I'm not going to comment on it. I decided to look past this aspect and truly engage with the game as an actual game. 2. There are some spoilers in this review. I'll make sure to warn about the spoilers when we get close. Hello everyone, my name is Brent, and this is my review for Stellar Blade. First, let's talk about the download size. This topic isn't the typical way to start a review, but I feel like it's important these days and it gets overlooked. Modern gamers have become fairly desensitized to large download sizes for games. So much so that it's now a rare pleasure for a game to come out that's of a reasonable size. On average, the download size for a game is around 70 gigs, give or take, with some bigger AAA titles such as Final Fantasy VII Rebirth, Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which doesn't even have the full game on disc, and most Call of Duty games exceeding 100 gigs. Because of these large download sizes, and that's before any patches that could potentially add more to your storage consumption, many gamers have to frequently purge their console's hard drive in order to make room for other games. And then there's Stellar Blade at about 30 gigs on disc. On top of that, depending on how many times you complete the game and how much of the side activities you do, it offers a 30 to 40 hour single playthrough experience to a roughly 70 hour platinum experience for gamers to enjoy. That's amazing compared to other AAA titles and popular games of today. Spider-Man 2 is about 98 gigs on disc and offers a 10-hour single playthrough experience and a roughly 20-hour platinum experience. God of War Ragnarok is 91 gigs on disc with a 20-hour single playthrough experience and about a 40-hour platinum experience. Okay, quick disclaimer. The times that I just mentioned above are based off my experiences with these games along with what I've heard from others. However, I'm well aware that there's people out there that just steamroll games and get them done in just a few hours. I mean shit, for my bad ending run of Stellar Blade, I ran through the game on the easiest difficulty in about 6 hours just to get it out of the way. Nevertheless, these are just a couple of examples of high-profile AAA games on PlayStation that contain roughly the same amount of content, or less, but are much larger in download size than Stellar Blade. As I touched on earlier, these sizes are just what's on the disc. I haven't even considered what subsequent patches will add to these already large download sizes. There are even more games out there, both first and third-party titles alike, that are guilty of being large download-sized games without the content that should be reflected with such a large download size. I feel like it's important to give praise to the games that can offer an optimized lengthy experience that's worth our time and money, looks good, plays well, and won't consume a fifth of your console's hard drive. Stellar Blade covers all of these bases. Alright, let's move on to the story and characters of Stellar Blade. How do I describe the story of Stellar Blade? Well, it's interesting and a bit complicated at times. The on-the-surface narrative of Stellar Blade is about Eve, an airborne squad member and her companions working together to defeat the Naytiba threat that has ravaged the Earth to a near-inhabitable state. In order to do this, they have to hunt down and destroy several Alpha Naytiba, which will allow them to gain access to a place called the Nest in order to confront the Elder Naytiba, whose defeat would eliminate the remaining of these creatures. Easy enough, right? Well, below the surface it's a bit more complicated. The lore of the world of Stellar Blade, which heavily impacts the present narrative, is explained similarly to how the lore is explained in FromSoft games. Also, this is your spoiler warning, move on to the next chapter if you wish to skip it. Throughout your time in Stellar Blade, you'll come across human remains that you can examine, with most of them having some kind of note that you can read. As you progress through the game and pick up more of these notes, you learn that the world has been ravaged by multiple wars, and the Naytiba are essentially failed human experiments that are designed to fight off androids that were created by an enemy AI. This is a very simplistic, short and long description of the story. I'm trying to be conservative with major story spoilers in this review, so I can't fully dive much further into what happens. Despite enjoying Stellar Blade's story, I can't in good faith say that it's the game's strongest selling point. What I will say is that the side stories that you do for the various people around Zion are exceptional. As you progress through Stellar Blade, more citizens become available for you to talk to, and interacting with them helps build a bigger picture of the world that Eve is exploring and trying to save. Helping these people helps create a Zion worth saving. I don't want to go too much into them because they are the best part of this game from a narrative standpoint. For the most part, I'd have to say that I enjoyed how Stellar Blade handled its characters. During your time in this game, you're mostly with Eve, Lily, and Adam, but Eve interacts with many characters in Zion and out in the Wastelands as well. Most of whom, and as I've already mentioned, have interesting stories that you can progress through as you play the game. One of the more interesting characters that you'll meet is a little robot who is pondering what it means to be human and have a conscience. This storyline gave me a mini existential crisis as it progressed. However, and to be completely honest, there were times when I wished that I had gotten to know more about certain characters such as Lily. If you do certain things in the world, Lily does have a story that is revealed, but it would have been nice to get to know more about both Lily and Adam. Furthermore, there were a couple other characters that seemed out of place, and their introductions and departures felt a little weird and unearned. Personally, I enjoyed Eve as a character and the subtle nuances of her personality. I always enjoyed the way that she would speak with the citizens of Zion. She is kind to the people that she encounters, and coupling that with the innocence and the naivety of her character always made for fun and interesting interactions. Some of my favorite characters that she would talk to are Clyde the Fisherman and Barry the Chef. Despite the story not being Stellar Blade's biggest selling point, I still enjoyed my time in that world. Where Stellar Blade truly shines is in its gameplay. While typing this review, I found it difficult to describe Stellar Blade's gameplay due to its simplicity yet still being refined to a T. While going through the game, it actually felt like I was playing a straight-to-the-point action-adventure video game. Stellar Blade reminded me of a time when games were more focused on delivering an actual game rather than this huge experience. I was a teenager during the PS2 era, and throughout my playtime in Stellar Blade, I would frequently think about other hack-and-slash games from that generation, such as the original God of War trilogy and Onimusha. It wasn't just hack-and-slash games though. Games like Resident Evil 4, The Suffering, and PsyOps The Mindgate Conspiracy, all games that delivered an amazing gameplay experience, also came to mind. I once told someone that although game and video game came second, it's always been the most important part to me. Don't get me wrong, there's cinematic games that I absolutely love, but nothing can compete with a game that actually delivers a smooth and enjoyable gameplay experience. Also, can we all agree that the very best video games always come with a hackneyed fishing mini-game that usually is weird at first, but once you get the hang of it, it's super easy? Anyway, let's talk about the combat. Stellar Blade is like most action RPGs you'll find out there. Basically, you level up and gain experience points. And with these experience points, you can plug them into various skill trees that will either grant you improved item usage or new combat moves. Now, despite some of my own inabilities to pull off some of these combat moves, I felt like the combat was the cleanest part of the gameplay experience. For my first playthrough, I played the game on Story Mode. Story Mode provides several accessibility options that assist you with your combat timing. I've never been particularly good at timing for parrying and dodging in most games that require it, but in Stellar Blade Story Mode and the accessibility options it provides, I was able to practice and memorize the timing for when I needed to pull off these moves. By the time I got to New Game Plus, I was able to play the game on hard difficulty without any sort of issue with the perfect dodge and perfect parry mechanics. The only combat moves I wasn't able to get down were some of the follow-up combos that came after perfect dodges and parries, but that was more of an overall skill issue rather than an issue with the game itself. I will say, when I was able to pull off something that I didn't think I could pull off, it was incredibly satisfying. Also, I never used the grenades that much, I just never felt like I needed to use them, so I kind of forgot about them. The last thing I will say about the combat is that I haven't had that much fun fighting bosses in a game in a long time. Yes, they can hit hard, especially in hard mode, but being able to use all of my memorized combat skills against them along with learning their attack patterns to come out fairly unscathed always felt amazing. I know that might sound like a weird thing to get excited about, but as I mentioned, I've never been good at games that rely on you to be good at perfect parrying or dodging along with follow-up combos. So being able to do that in Stellar Blade or any other game that has similar mechanics always feels awesome to me. Now on to Traversal and Exploration. Normally I don't talk too much about the traversal and exploration in my game reviews, mostly because my opinion on these things is usually implied in other aspects of the game that I address. However, I felt like I should bring it up here as its own thing because I do have some thoughts on it. I loved the exploration in Stellar Blade. It's not anything special, but what makes the exploration feel good is should you take the time to go a different direction than the one you're supposed to go down or climb up a cliff that's off the beaten path, that time spent typically won't be in vain. Throughout your time in Stellar Blade, you'll find a plethora of different collectibles and items that will help Eve with her mission, especially if you explore thoroughly. Some of these things include outfits you can dress Eve up in, deceased airborne squad members that increase Eve's health and ability bars, and these can collectibles that if you collect enough of them, you get various item increases along with an outfit for Eve. These cans are tricky to find though, so definitely check out every nook and cranny. Perhaps the only thing that bugged me about Stellar Blade was its traversal. Some of the platforming at times felt weird and somewhat forced. I don't know if it was a skill issue since I'm not particularly good at platforming in any video game, or if the platforming was as counterintuitive as I thought it was. I say this as a disclaimer to take what I'm about to say with a grain of salt. There were times when I'd be platforming from one place to another, and even if I thought I could make it to the next spot, I'd frequently overshoot it and either fall to my death or have to run around to the beginning of the platforming section and start over. The platforming just didn't feel good to me at times. On top of that, it felt like the developers tried to put in as many platforming mechanics as they could despite no real relevance. Like wall running, for example. This platforming technique is introduced fairly early in the game, so one would think that it would be a common mechanic, but it seemed like I only used it about 5 times within each playthrough of the game. Keep in mind, while looking for collectibles, I explored everywhere I possibly could on all of the maps, so it's not like there was any of the wall running spots that I missed. So, to sum up my feelings on the subject, traversing didn't always feel good, exploration, exceptional. Anyway, let's go ahead and wrap this up. The title of this review states that Stellar Blade isn't anything special, and I stand by those words. It seems like most developers these days are too busy trying to make the next big special thing. Although some developers succeed in making something special, some of these special games feel like they've lost their identity as a video game. To me, it feels like the folks at Shift Up weren't out to make some insane AAA blockbuster gaming experience. Instead, it feels like they wanted to just focus on making a fun game, which they absolutely succeeded in doing. Stellar Blade reminded me of some of the fun action-adventure games that I played back in the day that just focused on gameplay simply because the technology wasn't there to create this wild experience that are chock full of supernormal stimuli. Stellar Blade is just a fun game without all the extra bells and whistles, and to me that's what makes the game special. So if you're looking for a game that's just fun to play, then Stellar Blade is the game for you. Well everyone, I hope you enjoyed this review, and if you did enjoy this review and you want to see more like it, please consider subscribing. Also, I apologize if I sounded like a robot in this video. Reading from scripts can be hard for me sometimes. Anyway, have you played Stellar Blade? If so, I'd love to hear your thoughts on the game in the comment section below. In the meantime, I'll see you on the next one. Take care.